Hello, everyone. Welcome to the God of War Ragnarok review. And I'm going to put that in quotation marks so no one gets angry, regardless of what they say. Maxi and I have been reviewing a lot of stuff. Maxi just started reviewing recently and has been doing a pretty good job at it. And I wanted to go back to a two-person review format, or at least try it again. We did it a couple of times back on the Angry Joe show when I was there. I don't think they continued doing it. It was more so just to train me. But it's a really good way for us to touch up on reviewing things without a script. Because I don't know if people know this, but every single thing I have ever reviewed, I write a script for. And so you've got the whole creative process of writing and rewriting and like making sure it sounds really good and getting your points across. But that doesn't really help with the whole improv thing. That doesn't help with like being able to do things on the fly for like a podcast format or like on the spot reviews. And I wanted to just reteach ourselves and reteach myself specifically and teach Maxi the basics of doing that. So Maxi, are you excited?
Yeah, dude. It's a new type of format. I love trying new things. So I'm keen. Let's do it.
All right, so we're not gonna do like the casual conversation or anything. We're gonna just jump right into talking about God of War as a whole. The last two games, I gotta say, and just for anyone who's curious, we're not going to talk about spoilers. We're going to do our best to not spoil the remake of God of War from Santa Monica or Ragnarok, which is what this review is actually about, is Ragnarok itself. But we are going to talk about previous God of Wars, just because we need to set up a basis for how much this is different from what it used to be. Maxi, did you ever play the original God of War trilogy and like Ascension and stuff?
Yeah, so growing up as like a kid and then an early teenager, my mum wasn't massively into me playing video games a lot. So I would have to do it kind of in secret. I'd wake up early before school and my mum would still be asleep. And I would sneak out into the lounge room and I'd put the PlayStation on and I'd play with no volume on. And God of War was the first story-based game that I ever beat. Like in complete silence. Like I never heard the audio for the first God of War game.
And that
So
was
yeah,
one of
no,
the most satisfying things on PlayStation was that old 16-bit audio or whatever.
yeah, dude. Yeah, no. So, yeah. Look, I've played the first three, and I also had one of the PSP games. So I would say that I'm a God of War fan. I wouldn't say I'm a fanboy, but I definitely enjoy the games.
That's fair. I had a lot of good experiences with them as well. I think Ascension was really funny. I believe it was Ascension when you were time traveling and doing really crazy stuff like that. So they had a really weird roller coaster of things you had to do. And at a certain point, you could tell that God of War was just like, well, who else do we have to kill? Because the
Yeah.
original trilogy and the extra games, they went all the way to the point where you're killing these random gods. You're causing massive worldwide destruction. Like when he kills Poseidon,
Yeah, you caused
initially,
the apocalypse.
you cause the apocalypse. Yeah, when you kill Poseidon, you flood the world. So, there's stuff like that. And it was interesting to see them just suddenly pull everything back with the release of God of War, the remake, and go into Norse mythology. Because last I checked, the world was kind of screwed. Like
Yeah.
Kratos kind of screwed the entire world. And so it was really interesting to see, oh, there's another whole set of gods and they have their own ramifications and all this other stuff. We'll just rate the first game right now just to get it out of the way. I loved it. It was a 10 out of 10 for me.
Yeah. Look, I probably wouldn't give it a 10. I'd probably give it like an 8. It was a good game. I don't think it was perfect. I think there were definitely parts of it that was a bit weak. But yeah, definitely an 8.
That's fair. It was a 10 for me just because I hadn't played a game like that in a very long time. And it was definitely a genre defining game at the time for me because a lot of other games tried to come out and emulate that afterwards. I mean, we had like Babylon's Fall and a dozen other copycat style of games trying to come out and just copy what God of War was and trying to do it in MMO format and all this other stuff. And they failed. They just couldn't do it. And so I had a lot of high expectations for the sequel. And I gotta say, like straight up, I wasn't disappointed, but it wasn't as good as what I thought it could be. So there was a lot of hype for this game, Maxi. Do you think that it lived up to the hype that was basically going around and people thought that it was going to be like the best game ever made?
Yeah, I think that Ragnarok did live up to the hype. For me, I adored God of War from 2018. In my mind, it was one of the most sound, well-structured games of the last kind of 5-6 years. And I was really, really impressed. My final experience with it at the end of it, when I sat down and I watched the credits roll, was just satisfaction. I didn't have any feelings of like want or need or desire for more. I just really enjoyed it. And I was excited to see what they did with the sequel. When I started seeing all the stuff with the sequel, I was definitely excited. But I think as someone who's been a part of the gaming industry for so long and played so many games, you start to have that thing where you love an original game so much,
Mhm.
sequels make you nervous. And I think that was definitely a part of me that was nervous about an upcoming sequel.
That's really true. I was definitely in that park where I didn't want to believe in the sequel, and to me, I thought that, well, the first one was so good, they might just bloat the second one, because that traditionally happens. They either try to add too many things, they go too far, they add too many complicated systems, or it's just not as good. And so one of the things that I really tried to do was avoid literally anything about it. I didn't subscribe to what people were saying or what they were hoping for, or what the trailers were showing. I just ignored everything about the game before I actually sat down and played through the whole thing. And I wasn't nearly as hyped as a lot of other people, but I was hopeful. And I think that's the best way to say it, is that we were both hopeful, right?
Definitely. Yeah, there was definitely things that at the end of God of War, when I started thinking about it more and more, I started being like, oh, I hope a sequel brings this in. I hope that they make these subtle changes. And I'll be honest, I was really satisfied playing God of War Ragnarok. They were kind of ticking all the boxes that I felt were slightly missing from the original remake in 2018.
I'm right there with you. And if we're gonna summarize, just so we could start into the bulk of this review, what the story is, the essential story of the entire series across these two games, I guess, so these two games specifically, would be that Kratos is trying to live in retirement and people don't let him. And across the way, he learns more about his son and more things he
Yeah.
wasn't aware of going on. And that whole arc with him and his son comes to a resolution. Although we're probably going to get another game. That's not very a lot of spoilers, but I could see a third game in the future. And yeah, it's all about a dad and his boy. I think is the best way to summarize the generic story that is, without going into too much detail.
Yeah, it's a story that's focused on loss and emotion and connection. It's focused on the grief of losing someone that you care about and that shared grief with someone that you should be close to.
Hmm.
Anybody who knows Kratos knows that for the most part, he tends to keep people at an arm's length. In God of War 1, 2, and 3, even when he has the opportunity to have a connection with somebody, we're talking like Pandora with Pandora's box.
Yep.
He tries to keep her at arm's length. Even when he sees his wife and his daughter in God of War, I think it's
It's
Ascension when he
Ascension when he
gets
goes
like
back in time, I believe.
when
Yeah.
he goes back in time and he gets to see them, he still kind of keeps everybody at arm's length because he has a genuine hatred for himself, which as you play the games, you get an understanding of to why. And in 2018's God of War, you really get to explore how Kratos feels
Yep.
because for a lot of the time in the first three, he's just angry. He's just an angry dude who knows how to kill stuff. But in this, he has a genuine connection. One of my favorite moments in the first game is when Kratos and Atreus are talking, and Atreus turns to him and says, why aren't you upset? Like, why aren't you doing anything?" And Kratos says, "I'm letting you grieve in your own way. Let me grieve in mine." It's kind of sat in the back of my mind as I play as Kratos that this is a man in mourning. It's a really sad and defeated person who
Yeah.
doesn't he just wants to live honestly like a quieter life, but things keep, pulling him back in. And he just wants to keep those that he cares about safe. And in the first game, he has like a hesitancy towards expressing that. Case in point, there's a scene where Kratos and Atreus are hunting a deer, and Atreus gets upset. And Kratos is slightly behind him, and Kratos raises a hand as if to put a hand on his son's shoulder to reassure him. He hesitates and then he stops himself. There's a genuine battle going on in his head where it's
Yep.
like he has no idea how long he's going to be here or if something will be taken from him and does he want to maintain that connection. Ragnarok kind of explores that a little bit more and it's really, really satisfying. The writing is fantastic and
It
I
is. I will
genuinely
say,
enjoy
yeah.
yeah, again, without giving away any spoilers or anything like that, like the characters are written so well and I was genuinely blown away by some of the moments in the story.
I think it's good to say that in the first game it was kind of like a 50-50 split with Kratos being the focus. And in the second game, it's less about Kratos in this one and more about like all the other characters that are involved in his story. There's definitely a lot more emphasis on his son this time around. And I like that. I like exploring other characters. I like being able to see more of the universe, more learning more about who's involved with what. And it was just a solid way to do it. Like you said about Kratos, I think the biggest thing that they nailed on the head with both of these stories is the fact that he at any point could go pretty much ballistic and absolutely end everyone involved that's being a pain in the ass. But he's got this
Yeah.
like super reserved nature and timidness. I guess you could say like just a mild timidness, because he doesn't want to be the god of war. He doesn't want to do it because of how much damage and destruction it caused and how many people he cared about that he hurt and or got killed in the original titles. And so you can tell that the entire both games just involves him trying to hold his punches and talking about how he doesn't want to be the god of war anymore. He doesn't want to be that individual. And I guess, you know, Maxie, it kind of sounds like a duality of man.
Well,
type of
there is a badass moment where he's talking to a character and Kratos basically says, keep pushing me and you will find out the god that I once was. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
there is, for people who have played the first 3 God of War games and loved the power that Kratos wielded and his ability to tear people down and have thought, oh, well, he's really emotional and it's more down to earth in this one. He's still that Kratos. He's experienced all of the things that you have experienced and played within all of the God of War games. All of those games are still canon. This is kind of like an older, wiser, slower Kratos.
It is nice. And honestly, we can't go into much more with the story, but overall, both of the stories and honestly the story conclusion in this game are fantastic. That alone put it worth a lot of people playing and just seeing the resolution of stuff. But Maxie, let's talk about the graphics of the game. Do you think it was a massive improvement from the first game to the second game, or is it on par? I mean, obviously the first game came out on the PS4, I believe, and like the, oh god, what was it, the Xbox One, I think, was the competitor for the 4 at that point. God, there's so many Xboxes. But with the new release of the new consoles, and you know, the PS5, the Xbox Series 1S or whatever it is, do you think that it improved visually a ton?
Look, I'm going to say the answer is yes to both of them. I think that it looks very similar to God of War 2018, but the details, they went so hard on the details. Now, keep in mind, I played God of War Ragnarok on a PlayStation 5. It is available on the PS4. I haven't seen what it looks like on the PlayStation 4.
Neither have I, honestly. I played on the PS5 as well.
But my entire playthrough, I had my partner Haley sitting next to me, and because of that, we would take so many moments as we played to just kind of slow down and look around. And not only are the set pieces beautiful and the cut scenes are crisp and gorgeous and they run at great frame rates and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But just as you're walking around, the skylines, the views that you get everywhere from the underground caves to fighting on top of things and just on ground level, like, everything is so full of life and detail and beauty that it's kind of hard not to just take a second and let the game take your breath away a little bit.
And there's a lot of places that are set up for that too, where your characters actually respond to views and you're supposed to just sit there and just, there's a bunch of hidden segments too as well, Maxie, where if you just stop and go to certain places on like cliff sides and stuff that you would normally ignore and just look, your characters talk. They'll talk to each other about it. There's a bunch of hidden dialogue like that. And so I agree completely with you that the detail of everything has been kicked up to an 11.
I think that the beauty of it is that it hasn't aged the 2018 game. You can go back and play the 2018 game and not feel like you're playing something that has been aged or that has been dated by its successor. It looks very, very similar, but also there are aspects that you will notice. It is not like Last of Us Part 1 and Last of Us Part 2 where there's a genuine difference because, you know, there is a big jump between the PS3 and the PS4.
Absolutely, yeah.
The way they've done it, I think they've more focused on having more on the screen in Ragnarok and giving you a larger distance for your view distance and improved frame rates and just little details, bugs and birds and animals moving around.
Yeah,
sun setting
like
and falling. It's just it's gorgeous.
I really like the visual storytelling they went for as well. God of War, the original in 2018, had some visual storytelling, but there's a lot. There's a lot you can pick up in this game, especially when you're going to set pieces. And if you just take the time to look around, just things on the ground, you can see signs of struggles. You can see that people suffered. You can see what happened to people who lived in certain areas when you went there because of what's happening with Ragnarok, and Fimbulwinter and all that. You can basically pick up on how much people are getting affected by this. It also helps to see like little mementos and things that certain characters have in certain places that give you deeper insights to them. And this is all stuff that didn't need to even be there, that most people don't even notice. But you could tell the set designers and the game designers for the world sat down and were like, okay, I need to put this specific thing like this amulet right here hanging off of X thing So you notice that and you realize, oh crap, that's the thing from this leading to this and this. But it doesn't matter on the story. It's just a callback, and there's a lot of that. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of things you learn about what's happening in the world around you. Just like what Maxie said, if you just sit still and look. As far as audio and sound, I think we covered the voice acting. Everybody in this game, there's not a single bad voice actor, I would say. There's nobody that fudged their lines. There's no one that sounds out of place. I never had any complaints about any of the characters. They were all genuinely convincing and their voices fit well. I really liked Thor. I thought Thor was fantastic in this game. Can't talk too much about him, but yeah, Thor's in the trailers. Everyone knows Thor was coming. Obviously,
Yeah, you're 100%
it's like
right. The
Tubby
voice
Thor,
acting in the
but
game was pretty phenomenal. Combat sounds fantastic. General voice acting, conversation as you're playing the game. It's all pretty top notch and done pretty well. I'm not going to just start throwing credit around to all the different actors and actresses because it'll take up way too much time. But yeah, look, I think I was pretty impressed with the voice acting and just the sound design in general. A lot of the issues that I've seen from people have been in regards to the music, which we'll touch on in a little bit. But I was a big fan of the music. I was just a big fan of how the game felt in general. And I think that the audio did nothing but assist that positive effect.
it genuinely feels like people. They feel like real people talking to each other. And that's what really sold this game the most for me was it never felt disconnected. It felt like when they were talking and bringing up random things, it was always at the right time, you know? They never did it during a battle when you're just focusing. They knew that Kratos had to focus. And then after the battle, they'd make quips and jokes and go at each other and talk about it and stuff. And it was very like, you know, after you and your friends or you and your family get done doing something, you're just like giving each other shit at the end of things. And it was always just like, it felt like when they recorded this stuff, they were in the same voice booths with each other, having an actual conversation versus like these separated lines of dialogue that just get edited in post. And it's been a long time since I felt like they were real people talking and not characters. Like,
I didn't want to leave. Like I'd be at like a table and two characters would be talking to each other in the game and be like, "All right, you can go," and I'd be like, "I'm kind of enjoying just
dude,
listening to this
I ate
conversation."
so many weenies, dude. Like so many little sausage weenies. I got an achievement for sitting there and eating those weenies for like 35
God.
minutes. And that's another thing too, is you get stuff like that, little charming things where it's like Maxie said, you have an option to get up from like a dinner table situation, but if you just want to sit there and eat your little mini weenies as Kratos and everyone just stares intently at Kratos eating weenies for 10 minutes, you can do it. It's just little stuff like that. It's like all of this just adds so much personality to the game, and I think the voice actors knocked it out of the park. So soundtrack. Honestly, there was a couple of moments that I really like the music in this game, but I do need to say straight up, there was nothing unbelievably memorable. For example, like when I played Doom 2016, I wanted to listen to the music all the time, always afterwards. And it was just like, it stuck with me because the game was the soundtrack, sort of, you know what I mean? You couldn't have the game without it and vice versa. God of War really didn't have that for me. Obviously, you get like the orchestra combat fights and like the combat music and the drums. And, you know, there's certain like scenes that are really emotional that have like strong violins and like music that really amps up the sadness. But I had no urge to go and look up any of the songs post credits. Like it was kind of like it served its purpose, but didn't carry it for me.
But I think that that's a lot of the time that's what a good soundtrack will do. Doom, I think, is an outlier in terms of soundtracks because it is designed for you to play with the music. The music is designed to drive you forwards, and all of the way that game is designed, it's millions of or tens of thousands of small audio clips put together so that as you gain momentum, the music gains momentum, and as you calm down, the music calms down. God of War, in my opinion, nailed it. If you're thinking, well, how different is it from the first game? Not very.
No, it's
and
not.
that's kind of going to be a theme for Ragnarok, is that this is not a brand new experience. In a lot of cases, you're actually going back to the same areas. So you're seeing a lot of the same stuff, but in a different light, years and years later, because Ragnarok is set a few years after the end of God of War 1. I think that the soundtrack, it didn't stick out to me until it really wanted to, and then I really noticed it. When you would have like Kratos' theme come in when he's taking a serious moment, when Odin would appear and he'd have his own magical theme, or different characters having different types of moments, and then sometimes if two characters were communicating, sometimes the score would combine their themes, and it would just work so well. As a fan of music, as someone who's been playing music for a very, very long time, I was genuinely impressed. I understand what you mean. There's no part of me that thinks that I should add the God of
Yeah.
War theme to my Spotify playlist, whereas I have a couple of the Doom songs in my Spotify playlist. But by no means does that mean that this soundtrack is bad. I think that whatever your rating for the original God of War soundtrack would have been, would be what your rating for this God of War soundtrack would have been. It didn't really
Yeah, I
improve.
agree.
It didn't really fall apart or anything like that. It just kind of stayed the same, but it was great.
I did notice there was a good number of places where it felt like there was dead air without a soundtrack going on.
Hmm.
Especially when you're doing some exploration areas, I felt like maybe my game bugged out or it wasn't intentional or something. But I definitely got some areas and zones where there just was no music. And I thought to myself a couple of times while playing, it would be nice to have some sort of like background ambiance music to go with like the visuals of what I'm seeing. Like for example, when I was doing it was a desert area. I won't say more than that.
Yeah.
There was no music. It was just ambience and sound. And so I was like, hey, there could be some filler here. Obviously, you would go into the combat music and vice versa, but it wasn't bad. And I agree with you, it wasn't bad. It wasn't like I definitely wasn't one of those things where it was like you needed the soundtrack to enjoy the game. But there was a few things where I was like, man, it could have just had a little bit more and it would have been perfect.
Yeah, I do know. I do agree. I know exactly what you're talking about in
Yeah,
terms of there being certain points in the game where maybe a soundtrack would have been good, but in my opinion, and maybe we just differ here, I didn't miss it while I was playing the game. Like, yeah, there was sometimes dead air, but also kind of sometimes appreciated that, especially when coming to a new area, because when you move into a new area or a new place or a new realm, as is Norse mythology, uh, you're taking in a lot of visuals, and to have a brand new soundtrack coupled with that, I don't know, it would maybe give me a kind of less goofy Mario World theme. You know what I mean? Where every level has a different song, or every world has a different track that constantly plays. There wasn't a part of me that felt like something was missing, but I also understand where you're coming from.
yeah. It was just a small thing I noticed because I like having that background music when I'm exploring and looking around. It helps get rid of the monotony of doing a lot of the puzzles later on, which we'll talk about, that were just
Mm.
like a constant filler sort of thing. But outside the soundtrack, as far as the other audio, I have no complaints. It all super top tier combat, sounds, anime or impacts, gore effects, explosion sounds, magic, anything. It's all top tier. I honestly genuinely could say that they knocked it out of the park with pretty much everything, including custom sound effects for like weapons powering up and doing certain things to certain enemies and enemy deaths. All that was just superb. Since we basically don't have much more to talk about that, let's talk about the combat itself. Personally, I think it was just a better version of the game's combat. And for anyone that doesn't know, this game plays a lot with combo oriented third person combo combat, where you basically are weapon swapping between different weapons to keep combo chains going. Think of like a side scrolling fighting game, but in third person and more really dynamic with what you're doing. And they took that formula from the first game and just improved massively on it by giving you even more stuff for your toolkit in this game to keep doing crazier and more insane stuff if you're capable of doing it. But they also didn't punish anyone who didn't know how to do that. It's entirely possible to just play through the whole game doing very basic things and still feel good and cool about yourself. But the potential for this whole system and everything they added is almost limitless. And I've seen some crazy stuff on Twitter of people and TikToks of people doing juggles and combos I never even knew was possible.
Yeah, look, this is kind of where my criticism will actually begin for God of War Ragnarok,
That's fair.
because God of War 1, the combat was so fantastic and I genuinely enjoyed it. And I was really excited to see how we were going to extend into God of War Ragnarok. Um, when I first started playing, I was like, great, fantastic. It feels pretty much exactly the same. And then you start going through your skill tree and you realize I'm unlocking the same
Yep.
skills from the last game,
Yep.
the same moves from the last game. Even as I explore, I'm unlocking the same like heavy abilities and light abilities as the last game. And that, I'll be honest with you, was disappointing for me. I didn't expect to be able to come back and have Kratos have all the same abilities and all that kind of stuff. But things like throwing the axe and calling it back to get critical hits at a certain time. I
Yeah.
shouldn't have had to unlock that again. Like that was a little bit sad and a little bit weak for me. Um, when you first start off, you'll think to yourself, "Wow, the skill tree looks very small." Don't fret; it does
It
expand.
gets way bigger. Yeah.
But yeah, there was a massive part of it where a lot of the time I would unlock an ability and I already knew how it worked because I used it last game. I wish that there had been a little bit more creativity. I understand that those abilities and those moves and those skills had value and were good and were fun,
Yeah.
but it's another game. Like give me more stuff. That's to say they do have some new moves and some new skills and everything like that. And without spoiling anything or anything like that, you're going to get to experiment with different fighting styles
Yep.
and different types of weapons from the two that you used in God of War 2018. And those new weapons were so fun. I enjoyed them immensely
They're
as I
tremendous.
played the game.
And it was great
Um,
because they were more built to complement the original ones more so than
Exactly.
be on their own. They felt like combo extenders. And like this is for this when you do it with this combo and stuff. But I get what you're saying completely, where
Yeah.
it felt like the first third of the blades and the axe and the shield were basically just relearn everything you already did before you got to the meat of everything. But that being said, and I 100% understand that criticism, I did like about halfway through the game and onwards felt so good once you got into the flow
Oh
of the new
yeah.
weapons.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like to talk about the things they expanded on, the shield is more prominent in this game. You don't just have one shield that does one thing anymore. You will be able to pick up different variations of shields that do different things and give you different abilities. And you will pick up other weapons as well that you'll be able to experiment with
Yep.
and everything. So definitely not saying that the combat was bad by any means, but 100% the way you define it, that first third, it was just
The
kind of
first
like
third is just
uh,
samesies. Yeah.
it really reminded me of like playing Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. You know, at the end of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, you've created the Assassin's Guild, you've built up a legacy and an empire, and then in Revelations, I believe it's Revelations. No, sorry, I'm going to start that again. In Assassin's Creed 2, you build up Ezio's skill set. You learn all these moves. You learn
Yep.
how to use the dual hidden blades, etc., etc., etc. And then at the start of Brotherhood, your compound is attacked and destroyed, and you lose everything. And then you have to start again. And I remember playing that game and finding that frustrating, being like, okay, I understand if like you don't have this, like you don't have smoke bombs anymore because you lost your collection, so you have to go get more. But like you know how to do dual takedowns. Like that doesn't change. Like why
No,
do
it
I need
doesn't
to
change. You don't
relearn that?
relearn that. Yeah.
And that was a part of this God of War that was very frustrating to me, was that yeah, like there was no explanation as to why Kratos had to learn how to do a heavy kill again,
How to
or
rethrow his
something,
axe. Yeah.
or how to rethrow his
how to
axe and time
block.
his critical hits.
Had to relearn how
Yeah,
to block. Yeah.
yeah,
And they could have
that
really used an accelerated start option. And that's something that they definitely should have considered. I remember there was an interview where they talked about possibly including an accelerated start, where essentially most of the basic stuff you already had learned in the first game, if you chose
mm,
that option at the beginning, it would just make your character like level 6 or level 7 or whatever it was and just unlock those basic things. But they ended up not doing it. And I think it hurt the game because for new players coming to play from the beginning of Ragnarok, and there were a lot of them, I
mm.
respect the fact that you needed to relearn all that stuff because they didn't know. But for people that is like, have you played God of War 1 and would you like an accelerated start? Be like, okay, yeah, then you're like there and you're just into the new stuff, which would have been great.
And that's it. Like you're not going to really get to experience an alternative combat style until about 30% of the way through the
It's about
game.
a third in, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and that it is a long wait. If you've especially if you've just played God of War 2018 to refresh yourself and now you're coming to Ragnarok, you will feel like the brakes have been put on.
It's
That
like getting
you're
training
playing.
wheels back on your bike. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was for me. There is some criticism there. Like you said, though, the combat feels great. I would 100% recommend playing the game in performance mode if you're playing it on a PS5 rather than quality mode,
Absolutely. You won't notice the
because
difference. Yeah.
you won't notice the difference quality wise. But when you swap back to quality mode from performance mode, you will notice a genuine hitch in the way that the game plays. But in performance mode, in combat, I didn't notice any frame drops or anything like that. Combat chaining felt great. I felt powerful when I was in fights. Even up against bosses, I just felt great. And it
Yep.
was incredibly satisfying. Every single fight was fun. I just kind of wish there was more combat.
Yeah, and that leads into another discussion in a little bit just before we move on. For anyone that doesn't know, you get XP by killing things, you get XP by completing quests and completing side areas and doing little
Standard stuff.
explorations. Standard stuff that you would do in RPG. I didn't have any gripes with the leveling system. Obviously, to upgrade weapons and armor and everything, they get more powerful, they get more bonus stats. You have like specific stats like runic power that makes you do more fire damage. All this stuff was just your standard RPG fare.
But I feel like that was a great addition to God of War because they didn't have
Yeah.
that in the 2018 version. Whereas in this, as you used a certain ability more and more and more, and you were successful in using it, it was almost like Kratos would get better with it, and so you would be able to give yourself just a slight boost. It wasn't game changing,
No.
but just making it so that if you threw an axe to freeze an enemy 20 times, then the game would be like, all right, well, cool. Do you want that attack to do more damage,
It was
or would you
like
like the
5%
freeze to
more,
last
yeah.
longer? Yeah, and it was like, yeah, cool. It was like a little reward that as I played, I started to kind of take advantage of to make Kratos feel stronger and stronger.
I will say that I agree. Like, it ties back into like relearning the combat thing, re-upgrading the stuff that I already re-upgraded or upgraded in the previous game, and having to like be like, wait, this was already like super improved. Why is it garbage again? Was a bit grating on me because it was like, I personally don't like junk collecting. I don't like having to pick up things and pick up furs and hides and all this other stuff to just continually upgrade things. I think it's good for filler in between areas, and this game does a great job at it. But it's just an RPG upgrading system. I don't think it, like, other than the skills getting better, I don't think there was really a massive improvement. They just added more stuff, but it's serviceable and it got the job done. And there was at no point where I hated it. But there was at points where I was like, God, I just want to upgrade this already. Because, for example, the Blades of Chaos, for some reason it felt like for the first half of the game they don't want you using those blades. It's like everything is for the axe. It upgrades the axe. You constantly get axe upgrades, and the blades are sitting at like level 2 Chaos Flame while the axes are like level 4, and you're just like,
and that's it.
Yeah,
the Chaos Blades constantly lag behind, and so and in God of War 1 they had a brilliant system where some enemies were more sensitive to the Chaos Blades than others, and they do bring something kind of similar back to this, but it's not a visual representation of like this enemy is made of ice, hence you use the fire weapon. It's just a health bar that pops up above certain characters that's like, oh, that's an orange health bar, I should hit them with my ice axe, or oh, that's an ice bar, I need to hit them with my fire blades. It didn't feel, that felt like a gameplay mechanic, and it did kind of ruin my immersion a little bit. Whereas in the original,
it wasn't as intuitive.
It didn't feel as intuitive, and it didn't feel as ingrained, which was a little bit frustrating. But yeah, you're 100% correct. The first half of the game, which matches up with the original God of War, because you don't get the Blades of Chaos until halfway through the game, you know? And it did feel like that. It felt like I would level up the Blades of Chaos, and I'm like, all right, cool, now the Blades of Chaos are at the same level as the axe, and then I'd take 5 steps, and I'd be like, oh, here's an upgrade for the axe, and I'd be like, okay.
Yeah, well, it felt like they didn't want you using them. And I talked to a lot of people while I was streaming this and we were doing this, and a lot of other people were like, yeah, I just want to use the Blades of Chaos, but when they're doing like 1/3 the damage the axe does, even to susceptible enemies or resistant enemies to the axe, it just felt like the axe did more.
I felt like a majority of the time when I swapped to the Blades of Chaos, I was only quickly swapping to them to use their light and heavy special ability, and then immediately swapping back to my axe.
And I hated that. I got to be completely honest, because to me, like, I get the axe is cool. It's kind of like his signature weapon in this game, but in the first game, a lot of the reason he didn't use the blades is because he didn't have access to them. And the second game was kind of like he's falling back into the whole God of War thing. I really would have liked a more focus on the Blades of Chaos, especially since there's multiple lines of dialogue talking about like how ludicrously powerful they should become now that they're reawakening from all the war and all this other stuff. And they never get to that point. At no point did I ever prefer them.
And without giving away any spoilers, there's even a moment where the story would not be able to progress without them.
Yep.
And you use them in the cutscene, and then you're back. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, you just did something cool.
They're so
like,
dumb powerful in the cutscenes, and then you pull them out and they hit like wet fish. They're like, oh,
like
stop.
A character, without, again, no spoilers, but a character looks at the blades and it's like, oh, these have primordial fire in them. And Kratos is like, yeah, but I'm in a different realm. And the guy's like, that shouldn't matter. Like, these things are ridiculous. And Kratos is like, okay, but what about X? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and that can come across, like, dude, the axe is fun. Like, I love playing with the axe, and I think it was a brilliant addition in 2018.
I agree, yeah.
And the combat is fun. But the Blades of Chaos, I think if they were scaled up to be almost equal, to be able to feel just as strong using the blades as you are when you're using the axe would have been fantastic.
been
But you just
superb,
kind of
yeah.
don't get that, And also, I feel like there was a lackluster amount of flashy moves. The Blades of Chaos are a flashy weapon. Think back to, and I'll put it on the screen right now in the edit, God of War 1, 2, and 3. Kratos is jumping around, spinning, throwing the axe,
Literally
the
throwing
blades
people
around.
through buildings and stuff with them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But in this, they're just kind of like whips with blades at the end of them. And he has like maybe one or two spin moves where he does like a 360. It doesn't have the same oomph behind him. It doesn't have the same like genuine fear and terror that the Blades of Chaos have in the first three. And I understand why, to some degree, that the axe that you have should be a focus because it's a weapon that means a lot to Kratos and it's very magical. It has a lot of the same properties as Thor's Mjolnir, you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it being able to only be really activated by one person, it having recall abilities. It even, again, without any spoilers because it's been in the trailer, it does have a moment where it collides with Mjolnir and it does hold its own.
It holds its own. That's what it was in the trailer about, is it can sit there and just sit there with Mjolnir.
Yeah, exactly. So, I understand there's some strength there, but the Blades of Chaos, they're a weapon created by the gods, like specifically, like to be unbeatable by any man-made weapon.
So obviously we talked about this a lot offhand, and I made a lot of comments about how it's a God of War game, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot of war in it, and that ties into your previous statement about how you wish there was more combat. And honestly, that's my biggest complaint about it. And it's what held the game back the most for me, was just the sheer amount of crap you're doing in between actually fighting enemies. To the point where it's like, I was joking that every single level could be broken down into solve a stupidly complicated puzzle, then fight 5 or 6 enemies, then solve another puzzle, and then fight 5 or 6. Also, you never get to solve the puzzle. Your companions yell at you the moment you look at the puzzle about how to solve it.
Give me a second, man.
It's like
you
3
walk
seconds,
into an area and you would look in a different direction, and a character would be like, maybe you should do this. Maybe you should shut the fuck up and just let me figure it out. Like,
wasn't even like
leave me
3
alone.
seconds sometimes. Like we'd walk in and I'd be like, oh, this puzzle looks really cool, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna enjoy figuring this out. And then Atreus is like, just do this, Dad. I'm like, shut up! I'm just trying to play the game. But yeah, I made a joke with Maxi that this is less of a God of War game and more of a God of Puzzles or God of Rubik's.
Yeah.
Because
you made that joke to me before I'd even played the game. Like, I hadn't played it. I'd just gone back from my holiday, and I was like, how's God of War? And you're like, oh, it's pretty good, but it's more like God of Puzzles. And it made me chuckle, right?
Yep.
But I'll be honest with you, and our audience would already know, Del sometimes lets stuff get out of hand a little bit. Sometimes he'll over-exaggerate a little bit. So I was like, it can't be that bad.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad. Like,
it's really,
even to the point
it's
where,
too much. Yeah.
Even to the point where there's a particular part in the game where you have to use a mechanic of the game to open some doors made of light. And even one of the characters in the game goes, and we have to open another door. And I was like, I feel you, dude. I feel you. Like, I feel like, why
they were
have I had to
self-aware
open
that it was just too much. And the thing is, it's like they serve no purpose. And this is like a huge criticism. And like, sure, the game is like what? It was like 20-ish hours long, maybe 25 hours long if you do a lot of stuff. But like it just serves to pad game time. It's not enjoyable game time. It's not necessary. It's like, okay, I broke a light door. Okay, I broke a second light door. I don't need 17 more light doors that use the exact identical mechanic.
I understand the mechanic at this point. Let me move on. And the game's like, no. But what if you had to, the next door, you have to turn a lever before you do the thing that opens the door?
I think the biggest example is like during that whole light door segment, and maybe we can find footage of it, is when the statue section, where you have to do turn the thing, knock a statue one direction, go across the room, knock it to the separate direction, go back across the room, knock the other statue, shoot the beam of light, then go back to the other statue and readjust it to finish one light door. And it wasn't just with the doors. It wasn't just like one area of the game. Everything that I was doing was being impeded by pointless puzzles. And I get it. They wanted to be like more like Uncharted or more like a Tomb Raider, I think is the best example of this. But when 2/3 of your game, and I'm confident in saying 2/3 of my playtime was doing stuff like this, when 2/3 of the game is not even monotonous. It's like tedious puzzles that it's like, I just did a puzzle. Now I need to do another puzzle. And I need to do another puzzle. It's just too much, man. And I
I will say, I don't think it was 2/3. I think it was closer to 50-50. But the
That's
first
fair,
50%, the first 50% of the game, it's like 80% of what you're doing.
Yeah, that's
Like,
yeah.
like the last half of the game is a lot of combat, and I will give the game that. It's a lot of combat, a lot of great boss fights, and all that kind of stuff. It's absolutely fantastic, right? But the first 50% of the game, I was like, I turned to Haley, and I was like, I kind of want to fight some more. Like, I'm not doing a lot of fighting.
You're not doing a lot of warring. Yeah, there was pretty much none of it. Yeah.
There's absolutely not spoiling anything or anything like that, but in the first game, you go to Alfheim, right? Which is a realm that the dark and light elves are at war together in, and they're constantly fighting each other. And you go there and you do some things, but you spend a lot of time fighting. In this game, you do make a return to Alfheim, okay? There's not a lot of fighting when you're in Alfheim.
No.
You're not doing, you kill maybe 40 enemies the entire time that you're there as part of the main story.
There's one segment at the end when you're leaving the area where you kill like
running.
15 guys, and that's like it.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing of that set piece.
Yeah, and that's like going into Alfheim to then being like, okay, we can go back now, like we can leave. That's a good 2 hours of gameplay. So kind of let that sink in, that over the course of like, maybe I'm being a little bit over exaggerated. Maybe we'll call it an hour and 20, an hour and a half.
It's about an hour and a half, yeah.
An hour and a half of gameplay. You kill 40 enemies, and half of those enemies you'll kill in the last 5 minutes of that hour and a half. Like, that's kind of like a good representation of just how kind of slow burny the game is in that first half. Not to say that it wasn't great and that it didn't like set up great story and there wasn't great conversations. I was by no means bored while I was playing, but like you said, doing that statue puzzle and just back and forth and back and forth.
I definitely got bored doing some of the open world stuff with the puzzles where it's like, oh, I need to do this one small thing to progress this side quest. Cool. 13 puzzles in. I'm like, stop! I don't want to do puzzles anymore, dude. Like, just let me do the thing.
And I think that the game kind of knew that, because there are times, there is a period of time where you're running through a desert and you go to do a puzzle and a big boss just appears out of the ground. There's definitely moments that happen like that where you think to yourself, like, okay, obviously the game knew that a lot of the stuff I'm doing is just puzzles right now, and it's kind of wanting to mix it up for me. And I think that they were pretty aware of what they had done. The puzzles, you do have to think while you're doing them. And there was a couple times where I would turn to Haley and be like, do you just want to look up how to do this? And she'd be like, no, we can figure it out. It was even one puzzle that drove me up the wall. And I don't know if you recall it. It's one of the chest puzzles, Del. You're in a cave surrounded by rocks, and you have to set 3 torches on fire.
Okay,
but one of them is hidden behind. One of them is hidden behind a membrane. Oh my god! Put a gun in my mouth.
But you had to do like the really stupid ricochet things and like figure that out.
But it barely worked. Like when you're trying to set them on fire, because you have to like set up these like things that will catch fire, but like they wouldn't. Like sometimes it just wouldn't work.
Sometimes it would
properly.
just pass through them and not burn. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was so frustrating. Like, I felt like I was tearing my hair out in the end. And in the end, I figured it out, but at the end of it, I wasn't satisfied that I had figured out the puzzle. I was like, I figured that out 25 minutes ago. The game just wasn't executing what I wanted it to do effectively. Like, stuff like that would happen with some of these puzzles where it would genuinely frustrate you. And that can make the whole, God of Puzzle versus God of War thing a little bit more annoying.
And I agree with you completely on it being way, way more front-loaded in the first half of the game. But it's like, to me, the first half of a game matters just as much as the second half. Obviously, a satisfying resolution. And so, like, I can straight up say I did not enjoy the first half of this game hardly at all, because it was not what I expected coming out of the first game, because it was like, okay, we learned how to do this. Obviously, everyone that's going to be playing this for the most part played the first game. They're just going to go hard into it. It's going to escalate. The story's going to go somewhere immediately. I'm going to be killing tons of dudes because Kratos is pretty much reawakened now and he's back in the swing of things. Like, this is going to be cool. And no, it's just puzzles for a good half the game.
100%. And by no means am I saying that the first half of the game makes up, the last half of the game makes up for the frustration of that first half. In fact, I actually kind of think there's a decent part of me that would be more hesitant to replay the game, knowing full well that I would have to do all those puzzles in that first half. I think that is kind of like a genuine killer for replayability. But at the end of the day, that first half also kind of gives you a lot more exposition. You get to learn more about characters, and so the slowness of those puzzles kind of has value there as well. So depending on what your reason is for the replay, it could make it out. But it was definitely frustrating my first run through.
It was really, it was just too much of a pace break, and I guess that's like what affected it most. Is the pacing was so bad for the first half of the game, and it was just, you just wanted to kill stuff and you never got the option. And it was like when you did get the option, it was over in like 30 seconds. If you were even slightly decent at the game, everything they throw at you for the first half of the game is a complete joke. Even if you try to do stuff early that you're not supposed to do, it's still kind of like a complete joke. It gets way harder later, don't get me wrong. But it was like, you'd be like, all right, yes, a boss fight, let's go, dude. And then you'd kill him on your first attempt, even on the harder difficulties, and just be like, oh. Then back to puzzles. And I gotta be honest, I almost quit and took like a couple day break because I was not enjoying the puzzle aspect of the game that much. And for any of you that listen to the streams, you could tell that I was just complaining. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't care about this block I need to move. Just Kratos can jump that far. I've seen him do it 16 times, dude. Just jump that bridge. And that was like another thing, is so many of the puzzles were so dumb. Like the puzzle before another puzzle, you'd watch Kratos jump like 17 feet across a gap like it was nothing. And then the very next puzzle, you'd have like a 6-foot gap with a box on the end of it, but you have to do the puzzle to do the gap, even though both Atreus and Kratos could just jump the gap like it was nothing.
It's the first thing that you do. The very first thing that you do in God of War 1 is you jump a gap. And it's a big gap. It's such a big gap that Atreus has to run up because he's just a little boy. You know what I mean? But Kratos jumps it without even stepping forward. Like he just goes dunk and
Kratos
makes the
jumps
jump.
like 85 feet in some of the situations. And then these 6-foot gaps require puzzles. And I don't know, there was a huge disconnect to that because I remember there was one specific puzzle where it was like, it involved using the blades to swing, and you had to do it, and you had to set up this really dumb swinging system to get to this box. But the very next cutscene has him jumping that exact distance manually.
Yeah. And my frustration wasn't necessarily with gaps like that, because there's a part of me that understands that sometimes you just want to put stuff in to kind of slow the player down a little bit and get a little bit more out of areas and all that kind of stuff. But for me, what frustrated me the most was the climbing. And when I say that, what I mean by the climbing is the climbing in this game slows you down on purpose, because a lot of the time when you're climbing, characters are talking to each other. That's fine. But when I revisit those areas and have to make the same climb and my characters no longer have a need to talk to each other, it makes me want to rip my hair out. There was a point where I climbed up, I did this massive climb and I climbed across, and I noticed that I'd missed a collectible. So I turned back around and crawled, and I went back, and the journey back felt like it went for about 1,000 years.
Like Metal Gear Solid frustrating ladder moment.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a lot of backtracking issues like that. The game did one of the biggest sins to me in gaming, where it's like, you go through an area the first time that's tedious to go through and a pain in the butt, but then you see a special type of door that you need equipment for, like 3 acts later, to be able to open. And they don't just give you a shortcut there. You have to go back through the really long, tedious way just to get that one door, to get that one thing that's behind there that you need to get for X thing later. And it's like, nothing really changed. They didn't add stuff. You just have to go back and open this door. And so it's that sort of stuff is like super compounded when you encounter things like Maxi said, where you're just climbing super slow, or you're scooting along an edge, like, that little bit of rock sticking out from a wall, and you're pressed up against it doing little scoots the entire time. That sort of stuff is just meaningless and pointless. And it just, there are so many things in this game I could see that were there unnecessarily to pad out player game time, and it didn't need them. You didn't
and I think that,
need it.
Again, I think the game was very self-aware, because there is a portion of the game where you and another character face a wall like that, and that character goes, "I'm not climbing," and he just picks you up and jumps. Do you know what I mean? Yep. And it's like, obviously even the game knew that the climbing can be frustrating and can be slow sometimes. I just kind of wish that there was a little bit more thought into the overall free roam aspect, because this game has replayability. It does have an end game, and it does want you to explore. That being said, it does do a really, really good job of prompting you to explore side laneways and everything like that. But you know that you've missed stuff as you play the game. The game even gives you a checklist. And so going back to pick up that last poem or that last, iconic artifact or fight X boss or whatever, you have to go and redo all of the movement stuff. You have to climb the same
Yep.
things and all that. And that can get a little bit tedious when all you want to do is get to that destination.
When I'm playing through a game a first time and I see a door that I know that I have to backtrack to later again, I just kind of let out an internal ugh, because I don't want to do that. I want to, like, it's okay to backtrack and like do certain things if they change an area or add more enemies or like do a new game plus sort of thing. But when I know that nothing's going to change, I just have to come back there to do that one thing later. It's not okay. It's kind of like a mood killer. There's ways to hide this stuff in those areas so you don't get exposed to them early on, but they don't try to do that with a lot of the cases. And I wish that they had thought about that sort of stuff, because again, this just ties into my biggest gripe. There's a lot of pacing issues in this game, and the pacing issues really held it back from me for being as good as what I felt the first game was, because there's just so much unnecessary stuff that, yes, the first game had, but a lot of people complained about, and they had a chance to fix in this game, but they just kind of like double down, more so with the puzzles than anything. They triple down on those sons of bitches. There's so many puzzles. All right, well, we've talked long enough about God of War. Maxi, I want to go into our final scores for this. So we're just going to go with, I guess the best way to do it is just give a final score and then explain why you gave what you gave. And if you wanted to go first, that'd be great. Otherwise, I could do it first.
Look, I'm gonna give the game a 9. 9.2 is what's sticking in my head, but we don't do points, so I'm gonna give it a 9. I think that I think the story was phenomenal. I think it was beautiful. I think it sounded great. I loved the characters and I loved the story. There were a couple little things that existed in the game, like character models glitching out every now and then, quality of life things that I feel like should have been changed, and also the fact that as you play the game, that first kind of like 30% of the game, you feel weaker than you did at the end of God of War 1, and that was quite frustrating because the weaknesses don't come from you missing artifacts or certain weapons, it's just certain abilities. It did kind of kill it for me just a little bit. It did reduce the quality of the experience for me. So I don't think it's a 10. I don't think it's a perfect game. But this is me being really, really critical. Everything in me wants to give the game a 10, but I'm being as critical as I possibly can. And I think a 9 is kind of like a good spot for it. I'm really excited to see what Santa Monica does next. So it's a 9 from me.
That's fair. I completely understand where you're coming from with it. And for me, I liked the game a lot. Don't get me wrong. I thought it was really fun. I thought it was a lot better in a lot of ways than the first game, but there was definitely a couple of times where I felt like I wanted to put it down for a little bit, just because, the first half was so hard for me to get through. And for me personally, man, I've played way too many puzzle games. I don't necessarily enjoy them. One of the biggest things was like when Joe used to host board game nights all the time, like 3-4 times a week. I just didn't want to play any board games. I'm not a board game guy. I don't like that sort of stuff. And a lot of this felt like the same sort of like tedious of learning and doing things that just felt like things I didn't want to do. And so given the fact that you made a very good point with, I don't really want to replay the game because I know I have to go through the first half again. That is not something I could say about the first God of War. I replayed it. I played through the whole thing again a second time just because I wanted to. But with this, like, I thought the second half was phenomenal and I want to replay that half. I don't want to do the first like 40% of the game again. I just can't. And the thing is like, I know how much I miss out on if I don't do those things now. And so it's like, crap, I have to redo those things because it makes me drastically more capable later on in the game. And so because of all that and the little other gripes, I want to give it a 7, but I know that it's an 8 in my head. It's just, I hate puzzles, Maxi. I hate gratuitous amounts of busy work like that. And so I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. My final score for God of War Ragnarok is going to be an 8 out of 10. It's a great game, but
it's all about the scale. It's all about the scale as well, right? Like if we were grading games on a scale of 1 to 100, it would get a 92 in my opinion. If we were scaling games, grading on a scale of 1 to 5, it'd be a 5. Do you know what I mean? Like because it's not a 4, but it like, and so the way we do it's by no means saying that it's like, it's kind of, I'm going against my own scale. Does that make sense? Like, because in my opinion, Ragnarok's a masterpiece, right? And a masterpiece is a 10.
Yep.
But there's so many, not so many, but there's just a couple little things about it that need to be represented in the score, and giving it a 10 would forgive
It's
those
just ingenuous.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I just think a 9, or like you said, a 7, or in your head or your heart, kind of an 8. I think they're both really fair scores.
Yeah, and it really just comes down to personal preference too. Maybe a lot of people really love the puzzle stuff, and I know a lot of people do. But for me, when I want to play a God of War game, I want to just murder stuff. I want to go in crazy combos. I want to see Kratos just grab things with Chaos Blades and throw them into walls and all this other stuff. Because that was, to me, the best part of the game. The combat and the stuff later on, the end game combat and the boss fights, they were phenomenal, and I wanted like 3 times as much of that. And it just took way too long to get to that point in my head. And so I can't give it a 9. I can't give it a 10 because I shouldn't feel like I don't want to replay a part of a game. And to me, that's just a definite issue. And it's not like this is their first game either. They had these problems in the first game, like I said, and they just doubled down on some of these things that people really didn't like. And personally, I didn't like. So 8 out of 10 for me is still a great game, and I 100% suggest it. But it's not going to get a 10 until I can do some modding on PC to fix some of these issues.
Yeah, 100%.
Anyway, guys, that's going to be it for this video. Let us know what you thought of this review format down in the comments below. Maxi, did you enjoy doing it this way?
I did. It's nice to have a bit of a more open discussion about it. I like the scripted reviews personally, and I think a lot of people do. I'm actually personally doing a scripted review of Ragnarok soon on my own channel, because I've been really enjoying doing the scripted reviews as well. I think that this is more of like a conversation, a bit of a back and forth. Like you said, this was a format that worked well on the Angry Joe show, and you know.
It helps.
We're a lot cuter than they are. We're a lot cuter than they are. You know what I mean? So it makes a lot more sense. I think, and I think that the audience would agree. I think that a way for this format to work really well would be the addition of webcams. I think that would give there something on the screen a little bit more. Because right now, if you've made it to the end of this video, which I hope you have,
hey,
please make it all the way to the end of this video.
On YouTube. Believe it or not, views don't matter nearly as much as watch time. It's crazy.
Yeah. Please make it to the end of the video. But if you have, thank you, first of all, because it's probably a 45 to 50-minute video. But second of all, really all you've seen on the screen right now has been examples of the things we've been talking about, and just overall game footage and cutscene footage. I feel like having us actually on the screen, being able to talk and kind of giving faces to the voices, I think would be a little bit more, I don't know, personable to that conversation, and a bit more engaging. Yeah. So that'd probably be the only change that I would make. But, you know, in terms of like the performance, I mean, I felt like we did well. It's my first time doing something like this, you know, yeah,
you did a great
I'd like
job,
to do
buddy.
it again. And I'm also sick as well, which I'm so stoked that you decided to do it. Like, I come back, I'm like, I'm sick, I can barely talk, and you're like, cool, we're going to record way more than we usually do.
Well, to be fair, I did give you a couple days. I mean, we were going to do it yesterday, and you were literally disconnected from your own brain. No, but thank you so much for watching, and as always, until the next video, this is Delrith and Maxi, and we'll be seeing you. Bye.
Bye.